like to welcome Julia Frank today, who's with Lutheran Disaster Response. So she's going to tell us all about that. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you, Sandy. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thanks for inviting me out. It was a beautiful drive this morning. As some of you heard, I live in Lansdale, so it was nice, not far drive, so that was nice. I want to just give you a little context of where I'm coming from. So my time is spent happily working on disaster recovery for the Lutheran Disaster Response Program in Eastern Pennsylvania. I work for Liberty Lutheran Services, so it's a large social ministry organization, kind of like if you're familiar with Catholic services, it's kind of like the Lutheran version of that. But just I have some information over there in case you're interested, but what we do mostly is senior living. So you might be familiar with the Manor at Yorktown or Paul's Run or Artman. So those are some of the things we do. And my focus is not only disaster response, but all congregational ministries. So I'll just mention those two ministries real quick. We have lay Eucharistic visitor training as part of the Lutheran congregational services we offer through Liberty. So we host basically home communion training for people twice a fall and twice a spring. So our next one is at St. Timothy's in Philadelphia. Coming up, and then we have one also in towards the Poconos coming up. We also have a bereavement ministry, so just so you're aware that those things happen through the Liberty Network. But just before I get into any more, but give you a little bit of more context. So as Lutheran Disaster Response, we have been doing this work since the 70s. They say in this area since Hurricane Agnes, if that rings a bell. But my mom, I always start out by saying I was born in 1972, and my mother always says it was divine intervention that I do this work because I was born through Agnes. So anyway, so just kind of the context of Lutheran Disaster Response and where we fit in is the long-term recovery piece of things. So long-term recovery from disasters can be months to years after something happens. And how we work in Lutheran Disaster Response looks a little bit different across the country, kind of depending on how many, if churches or a social ministry organization like Liberty, if they kind of commit to it locally, then we have a different kind of presence than you would if someplace doesn't necessarily have a commitment to the local recovery. And then it might just look like funding other organizations. So if something happens in an area where there's not a lot of Lutheran congregations, like Northern Nevada or something like that, then Lutheran Disaster Response from the ELCA still will engage, but they might work with Catholic Charities partners or other partners and send funding to do the work there. But we are very blessed, I guess you would say, to have a large density of Lutherans in this part of the country. So there's a long commitment to disaster response in this part of the country. In fact, Lutheran Disaster Response started in the Lehigh Valley. So, because that kind of brings that program to where we are here in Pennsylvania. And me personally, I got involved, like a lot of people who do disaster response, faith-based and otherwise, and maybe you have some of the experience here too, with Hurricane Katrina. I was a young mom, totally moved by the photos and compelled to act. And my home church, what some of you heard me say, was Trinity Lutheran in Lansdale. And we sent a team, and it was it was April, so it was 7 or 8 months after the storm. And I was amazed that there was still so much work to be done. And I was just naive, I think, because now I know how long it takes to do long-term recovery. And that was still just the beginning of recovery from Katrina. And I was in Mississippi and then made 5 subsequent trips. And during that time, there was a lot of money for preparedness, like preparing for disasters after Hurricane Katrina. And the Lutheran Church and the ELCA was engaged in that kind of interest in preparing for disasters. So that's where kind of people like me started to have positions around the country. I was a part-time position. I was, like I said, a young mom kind of going back to work. And then it became a much bigger deal over time. I now do it full-time. And I also serve as the president of Pennsylvania VOAD, which is Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. So I serve as far as with my Lutheran kind of hat on. My focus is Eastern Pennsylvania, Northeastern and Southeastern Penn Synods. But as far as the state of Pennsylvania, I work with a whole bunch of different agencies, and we try to make sure that we're building resiliency and capacity to respond to disasters and all across Pennsylvania, and then we coordinate with our national partners and things like that too. But the VOAD is really important for how we get our work done together. There's no way we as Lutherans Lutheran disaster response could do this on our own. It takes, you'll see in kind of the case study for today, it takes a whole bunch of organizations. So the VOAD includes groups like very well, like American Red Cross. Welcome to Joy. Good morning.
This is their normal classroom, that's why.
Okay, yeah, of course. So groups you know from American Red Cross and the Salvation Army, and they're like the first groups who, you see the shelters and people getting fed, all the way through the work we do with long-term recovery, and our partners like Latter-day Saints and UCC Disaster Ministries and Suchi Foundation. They're a Buddhist organization. So it's really a wonderful, like someone said the other day I was talking to, we might all not like the same sermons, but we all agree that it's important to help people. And in kind of the world we live in today, that's such a great, I'm very blessed to do this work because we work with so many different kinds of people, but we all seem to have the same, like, you want to help the person in front of you, which is really, I'm very glad to work in that environment. So I'm going to that's a little background, and I'll get into some of that in more detail. And so just some of the things we do here locally that you might see us on Synod information or anything like that is we do a kit making event twice a year, so flood buckets and hygiene kits. If you you may do those things here. I looked at your bulletin boards, you're very active. But we do the MLK Day event at the seminary, and it's kind of a neat time to bring a whole bunch of people from Lutheran congregations, but people from the seminary, other types of congregations and groups. We had like a sorority there. We had a couple other corporate partners. So that's a fun day to come together and be a part of that. And there's a lot of ways you can engage with it. And we also do God's Work Our Hands Day, and obviously the September, like I saw you have your God's Work Our Hands bulletin board out there that you're active all through the year, which I loved that. I took pictures of it. I'll probably put that on Facebook later today. And we do that at the Northeast Penn Synod office in Allentown, which anybody's welcome to come to as well. I talked about some of these things already, and I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail. It's really about the collaboration. So those were some of our partners. We work with FEMA and PEMA a lot, Federal Emergency Management and Pennsylvania Emergency Management and County Emergency Management a lot. She was our Region 3 FEMA director for a long time. She has since been forced into retirement. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about the summer storms of 2023. Because it's our most recent event that we are working on recovering from here in eastern Pennsylvania. And I'll also say we're still working in Bucks County, Philadelphia, and Delaware County from Hurricane Ida in 2021. So right here, we're still working. But this is in Berks County that I'm going to talk about because it was recovery we started and ended in the middle of the Hurricane Ida recovery. So this is in northeastern Pennsylvania, in Northampton County. There were a number of bridges out, and you'll see pictures of, we'll talk about Berks County mostly. So it hit a lot of, it was actually on God's Work Our Hands Day that this storm hit Northampton County, and prior to that on July 9th, that same year, 2023, a same kind of similar storm had hit Berks County and some other parts of eastern Pennsylvania. So if you've watched WFMZ at all, I don't know if that you get that up this way or not, the local TV station, but they covered a lot of this because they cover a lot of Lehigh and Berks County. And there was, in Berks County, the Antietam School District, one of their schools was damaged so badly that it had to be closed and it's being rebuilt, but they didn't get a federal declaration. And this was still back in, a couple years ago. We wouldn't that it would be completely out of the question today. But they also did not get a federal declaration for that, which just means when you get a declaration, there's a lot of funding that flows into the area, and individual families can get some assistance, direct funding assistance, and you have money to repair bridges and roads and things like that, and schools. So it was a pretty significant event in Berks County. They opened a multi-agency resource center, which is a MARC, we call those MARCs. And another program was activated for the first time after that event called DRAP, or DRAP. But I didn't come up with that, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Program. So that's a new Pennsylvania program, just so you're aware. If it happens here in Pennsylvania, and storms happen here, and again, with climate change and things like that, we absolutely expect that we will be using the DRAP program again. And it's a program that we don't need a federal declaration for. So Pennsylvania and your local municipality have to declare a disaster to an event. But then once that's kind of declared, then money can flow from this program up to $10,000 per household if they meet the criteria, which they're trying to make it much easier to meet that criteria. And not one of the issues when we work with disaster survivors is they have to repeat their information over and over again and kind of, qualify, just prove their case over and over again, and it's extremely arduous, and can talk about that more later. But it was the first time we used the DRAP program, and we were really proud of that. These were volunteers who helped us do outreach at the MARC. Some of them are from Lutheran churches in Warnersville, and there was also a couple UCC church volunteers that we had there as well. So that's at a MARC. There's a whole bunch of state and local resources there, and this is in a gymnasium in Exeter, if you're familiar with Exeter, outside of Reading. It's a town outside of Reading, in their school gymnasium, and we all get together at different tables, and then the families go around and kind of get information about what's available to them for resources. And we were there as Lutheran Disaster Response as part of that VOAD that I mentioned, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. So we just kind of talk to people and try to get a sense of, will your needs be met through the resources you're kind of getting today? Like, can we give you a flood bucket? Like, you probably make your flood buckets. Can we give you that and you'll be okay? Or do you think your insurance is going to cover it? Or do you think do you have a sense if you might need longer term help? Good morning.
Good morning.
No, we're good. So that's where we start meeting people, is at these multi-agency resource centers, and just get a sense of who we might need to be following up with, and we collect names and then tell you about the next steps. So this is like, if you can think of that picture at the MARC and that table where people were just sitting and we were talking to people as they'd come up, that's here. And this is where the Red Cross is, if this is a timeline, and where the church fits in. So churches fit in kind of these two, the beginning and the end. So voluntary organizations like churches, like Lutheran Disaster Response, we can be like supporting the Red Cross. You might be Red Cross volunteers yourself, helping to just do the feeding, sheltering, getting people kind of just situated so they can get back on their feet. And in large part, that takes care of most of the needs that people have. Some people, though, might still have outstanding needs. They file insurance claims. That could take weeks, months to figure out. For car insurance, rental insurance, home insurance. So they're kind of just waiting in that period of time. And then but hopefully her insurance can a lot of families I know, if it's in my neighborhood, they might have insurance and they call ServPro or one of the other restoration companies, and their needs are met. If it's big enough to have some kind of resource allocated to it through FEMA, or like I mentioned, that DRAP program from FEMA, that might be something that people are eligible for too, that could support, like help them, like that might be enough to help them recover. But then, and again, this takes weeks and months and sometimes years. Then it comes back to the long-term recovery piece. So there's gonna be about, I like to say, like if you gave out 100 buckets at a resource center on this side, about 10 people who receive those buckets will still have long-term unmet disaster-related needs over here. So they might, be on fixed income. Some of them might be people who inherited their house, like we worked in the Eastwick neighborhood of Philadelphia. A lot of that was people owned their homes, but they had inherited, so they didn't have a mortgage, which means you don't have to have insurance, mortgage insurance. So they didn't have insurance, even though they owned their house outright, but they didn't have the fund, like it was too like for their income, and it didn't make sense, like they wanted to spend that money on college education for their kids, or food, or medical expenses, and they didn't carry insurance, so they might have destroyed first floor, a moldy basement, and need replacing, but they didn't have the funds for. So that was a very common issue that we met in that recovery. So that's when we all kind of get together. We all, meaning like we try to get churches involved, different other community organizations, and we say, how can we figure out, what are the needs, how do we prioritize them, and how can we walk with survivors to meet their needs, and we call that long-term recovery. So again, this is about the case study of just the Antietam Valley long-term recovery effort. That was the Berks County storm from 2023 that I mentioned. So when we got to see those people who we met at the Multi-Agency Resource Center, some of the needs that we saw were people whose heaters and electrical systems were damaged. A lot of hot water heaters were ruined. People needed rental assistance. They had legal issues with their landlords because landlords might not want to make the necessary repairs. So those were the kinds of things that we were helping families with at the beginning, and we saw that those needs were kind of what we were going to have to figure out. How are we going to solve? It's basically all just problem solving. So how do we work together to solve those problems with the survivors? So like I said, we try to get local churches involved. This was a pastor from Advent Lutheran Church in West Lawn. He sat on the long-term recovery group in Berks County. And the other leaders from that long-term recovery group were a community organization called Antietam Valley Community Partnership, kind of like just a local helping organization that do fundraisers. Like they work out of their fire hall, and they do fundraisers for community drives like Toys for Tots and things like that, but they really stepped up. Another church, Pennside Presbyterian, a couple UCC churches, Lutheran Church. We also had Berks County Emergency Management involved. And then we needed a fiscal sponsor, which basically meant like when we had money, who's gonna hold it, who's gonna keep track of it. And that's a really critical piece of the recovery, like where does the money go and how do you decide how to spend it? So we had a UCC church that stepped up and volunteered to do that, which was a huge blessing to us. So the storm was in 2023, 2024, that all started to come to be in place. We met, this is like me on my back porch looking hot and sweaty. But we'd meet every week pretty much, and twice a week some weeks. But our team was 2 disaster case managers, so just to give you an idea how we make this work, we as Lutheran Disaster Response asked for a grant from the ELCA, and they provided funding for that, so we were able to pay 2 disaster case managers. And what they did was they basically, they kind of walk with every household through what is your insurance, what applications to different services can you make, who do you have in your family that might be able to help you, just kind of walking a lot of people through the process. We had 1 bilingual Spanish case manager funded from the Salvation Army, so that was another blessing. A construction coordinator, that person is Ed. I don't see him in this picture, but Ed was a volunteer through the UCC church, and he would go out and look at every property and figure out what was caused by the disaster versus what is deferred maintenance, like if something was already amiss before the storm happened. But what do we do about that? If it's the roof that was damaged before the storm, well, if we fix the basement and the roof's not fixed, it's really not gonna do any good. So do we help patch the roof at least? So he would kind of make those decisions about what was our scope of work and how much would it cost. And then we needed someone to coordinate volunteers, because that's where we save a lot of our money, is by using volunteer labor. They were also funded through the UCC Church, and then we had an intern with Lutheran Disaster Response as well, from Temple, who was interested in disaster work and was a communications major. So that was kind of our team to kind of meet this challenge in front of us. And we had 30 active cases, the 30 families that needed help, and most of the families were, so I'm gonna just go back here. We started with 175 households. That's the people that originally came into that mark. And then we got it down after callback. We called people back. We visited their house, things like that. We finally got to 30 cases. And most of them, about half, were at a mobile home park. I've been doing this since 2007, and every disaster is completely different, and there's always like some unique facet to it. This time it was the mobile homes. It was like, we had never like, okay, what's the issue in a mobile home park? And it was skirting, which is like the siding that goes around the bottom. And the water came through this creek, and so that ruined the insulation underneath the trailer. So some places it was moldy and was there, or it kind of ruined some heating units. So it was just like you had to get the insulation out and put new insulation in, and then put the skirting around to protect it, the trailer. So I mean, it wasn't expensive repairs, but it was truly back-breaking work. I mean, it was on people, like, it was a gravel underneath the trailer, and I mean, there were a lot of cats, feral cats in the neighborhood, so is that, hopefully you can make the leap on that, what means in underneath the trailers. But it was just not like, it wasn't like really like, it was hard to attract volunteers to this work. Like, it was a hard sell, I would say. We did have some houses outside the trailer park, like scattered across Berks County. This home was in Blandon, up Route 73, if you go up that way ever. She was just like, house was located in a low-lying area. The woman who lived in the house was on Social Security, fixed income, and just did not have money for repairs. So these repairs require volunteers, contractors, and a significant amount of coordinating, like just pulling all the pieces together. So I'll keep going here. So, I mean, congregations were able to support this in a lot of different ways. I love this shirt, this volunteer and serve one another in love. So I use that photo a lot in presentations. But congregations help us in this kind of effort in lots of different ways. In like very directly in this effort, these were people that we gathered in the Berks County area, and we did a training on how to call back and do outreach to the people we met at the multi-agency resource center. Like the 175 people, we would call them back and call them back again. How are you doing? Are you okay? Do you think you're going to be able to meet your needs? Do you still have unmet needs? And eventually that's how we got down to the 30 cases. But we had all these people kind of making phone calls over a series of weeks to just try to get to who do we really think needs help? Do we need to go out and visit these families? Which ones do we visit? Which ones say they're okay? Which ones aren't answering their phone? Which ones don't speak English, and do we need to get somebody else involved, like who speaks their language? Some other ways, people volunteer. That woman is from Holy Spirit Lutheran Church in Emmaus. If you are familiar with Glenside in Montgomery County, this is a picture of our annual Oktoberfest. They raise money for Lutheran Disaster Response. It was just last weekend. It is a wonderful event. If you ever want to go next year, check it out. It's fantastic. This was a picture of when we had AmeriCorps volunteers in Berks County working, and a couple congregations. This congregation supplied a van for the AmeriCorps team while they were here. So they were able to have 2 different vehicles instead of just one. So there's just lots of just different ways. If you all are interested, I'm always happy to like brainstorm with whoever's interested. How can you engage? There's lots of, be creative. I had mentioned the partners before, but we have lots of different partners that we work with through this. And that is our director of PIMA currently, and he was talking about the partnership with us as Lutheran Disaster Response in the VOAD. And he's a great partner, especially in the midst of all of the changes with federal policy. Having a director for PEMA that's supportive and just kind of taking a really proactive and positive response to everything that's going on right now. But just to note that we do work really closely. Like, it's not all just like kumbaya, like flood bucket work. Like, we really do, I feel like, real partnerships with government partners and other partners to figure out like structural strategies to meet needs, especially of people who have the most difficult challenges ahead of them for disaster recovery. So I'm proud of our work. I have to mention that for that Berks County recovery, one of the times we actually made a lot of progress on those 30 cases that I had mentioned was when we had an AmeriCorps team with us. They were wonderful. So it was young people. And I had mentioned the state of kind of the trailers and how difficult, like getting on your back, pulling out the insulation, measuring what the new piece of insulation's like, having to screw it back in. Like, it's not, I was under the trailer myself twice probably, and I was always happy when I was the one on the outside just handing the stuff to the person underneath. But having the young people with us, it was just, like they didn't, I guess like the point of this was like they didn't all come to the work with us as having the skills to do this work, but they were so eager and ready to work and learn, and they advanced our recovery so much in the short time they were with us. And the reason I leave this up there is that it was 7, and I crossed that out, 6 weeks, was because I'm still bitter about this. They were supposed to be with us in 4 weeks in Berks County, and then 3 weeks here working with us in southeastern Pennsylvania for Hurricane Ida recovery. But an executive order came out, and I mean, by this point we had felt like these kids were our family. And I say kids, but they were like 18 to 25. Executive order came out Tuesday. We knew as the leaders of the groups that team was going to be pulled back, and their deployment was immediately ended a week earlier than they were supposed to be. So they were told that they needed to go back to their home base in Iowa and just go back to their homes, like they were done. And they had no idea that was coming. We knew. We went down, met with them in person, the whole team's in person, and said, we delivered the news before their team leader even let them know. We took them out to dinner. By the next morning, they were on their way back to Iowa, which it was just so heartbreaking to me and to the young people, I felt frustrated on a number of levels. The families that we were working on their homes, they were left with incompleted projects. They still had a week left of work to do, and people were expecting their work to be done. It wasn't. We found ways to get it done. It was only a week. That, it wasn't like they were it would have been much worse if it was 2 weeks into their deployment. But, so that was frustrating. But I think for the young people themselves, that really broke my heart, because they had another 3 kind of rotations, or 2 rotations to do after they were with us. And these were young people that were figuring out their lives, and they were in college. They decided to not, college wasn't for them. So they were trying AmeriCorps, but they had a year in front of them. They were like, this is something, I'm going to learn some skills, and all of a sudden they were unemployed. So it's just, I just
Yeah, so you're saying not only was your week chopped off, their season was chopped off. They were just chopped.
Yeah. So I just felt it was very heartbreaking. A lot of the good news is a lot of them did get jobs at a camp in Vermont. I kept in touch with them. We shipped them t-shirts and stuff like that. But it was kind of heartbreaking. But they were wonderful, so they, just I guess showing that we work with all sorts of different partners. Took a picture with them at the pagoda in Berks County. But just that was one highlight and low light, I guess, at the same time. So one of the things we learned from the AmeriCorps deployment, and just the challenges we had in getting volunteers, is that we really have to build up our capacity here locally. Because we're not, we're not the Gulf Coast, we're not California. I mean, even last summer, there was Hurricane Debbie, which we have a federal declaration in Pennsylvania for Hurricane Debbie right now in north central Pennsylvania, but a week after Hurricane Debbie hit, Helene and Milton hit. So everyone, I'm guessing, probably is familiar with hearing about Hurricane Helene in the Carolinas, but once that hit, Hurricane Debbie was, you don't even remember it. But that's a recovery here in Pennsylvania that's ongoing. So we need to kind of, with the frequency of storms, with climate change, with a change in federal policy, which we know we're gonna have fewer federal recoveries, like funded recoveries, or it'll be different. We are working with our partners to try to build capacity. So one of the things we asked the ELCA for was funding to do more volunteer training over the next 3 years here in eastern Pennsylvania. So lots of different kinds of opportunities, from the callback volunteers to the, you don't have to crawl under our trailer, we'll pay people to do that again. But just to, like, even just basic, like, a lot of people know these things already, but just kind of familiarity, so you know how to, like, how can we engage and get more people kind of in the queue for recovery here. So that's one of the things we're really working on here in eastern Pennsylvania. And we're really looking for churches to put together work teams or just engage with us so we can continue to be able to respond locally. Ways to get involved. Our Facebook page is at LCS Mission, which is Lutheran Congregational Services. Volunteers I mentioned. The donations, like, thank you for your generosity, either locally or to the ELCA, because it does come back to us if you donate to the Lutheran Disaster Response Program at the ELCA. I mentioned a couple times we've gotten grants from the ELCA, and that's because of donations you make to the national church. So thank you for that. And the other thing I would say, like, just please know that what you're doing already here is hugely important. Supporting low-income housing, supporting people who are food insecure. I mean, I see it on all of your bulletin boards. Those are the people we try to connect with when something happens, and if you already have relationships with groups who support them, that's a way that we can actually reach people. So we try to work with churches and say, like, if it's in an affected community, who do you know who's a leader at the local food bank that can help us reach people who might be affected? So those are really important relationships you already have, so please keep doing that. And I always say Pennsylvania's getting hotter and wetter, and we're having more volatile storms, so we gotta keep building resilience. And just thank you for your partnership. And Linda Fry was supposed to be with me today. She's our case manager. She's amazing. She lives in Bucks County, that's why I wanted her to join us, but her husband had surgery this week and she couldn't make it. But thank you very much, and I'm happy to just keep talking about other questions you might have, or
Good morning. Are you Julia?
Yep.
Sorry we missed your introduction.
Yeah, that's okay.
You were late. Question, have you guys coordinated with Habitat at all?
We do.
And do you have a program like Habitat where you can sign on, and when there's a need in a community, folks who are in their database can jump on a project, from the community?
So in Bucks, it depends on which county, it varies from county to county, but in Bucks County, there was yes, we've worked with Habitat in Bucks County. And the program we have is what I would like to get to more with what you're talking about. How we generally operate is we have kind of people who understand what's going on at this specific house. We put a call out for volunteers, and whoever we get, like, people may have skills or they might not, but we don't really have that database that you're talking about. We have a database, but it's for just general information. So that's what I would like to get to build over the next 2 or 3 years, is a stronger pool of, like, okay, I know this person, and I can call out to that person. They already have their clearances. They already have, I know that what skills that person has. That person might be a good team leader. That's where I would like to get.
So just to follow up on that.
Yeah.
So if we put out a call to our congregation and got people who would be interested in doing that and have our own little database,
Yeah.
then they would call us and we'd say, put the
That's
call
great.
out to those
Good
people.
ideas.
Yeah,
Right,
that's
and then-
fantastic. That would be wonderful, and I'd love to
Yeah, we can
connect
work
on that. That would be fantastic.
Because we were involved in Habitat in Cape May County before we moved here, and they would send out emails, and they said, okay, in Wildwood, we're gonna be tearing down this unit. We need some folks, and you'd sign on to their workforce program, all simple on the computer, and it was
Yeah.
done. and then they would contact you, give you the hours to show up, and we were safety trained, and some people had their plumbing specialty, other people were generalists.
Yes, and that is what I would like to do more of. And I mean, and if there's we don't need to. I don't need to take over what Habitat's doing, but like I said, it's not always. It's not consistent across the county, so that's why it's important to kind of build relationships, develop our own program, just wherever we can work together. All gung
I
ho
was
for all
just
of
using
that.
Habitat as an
Yeah,
example,
they're
which you can
fantastic.
model against that.
Yeah. Yes.
And whether or not you use them is a secondary issue, is
Right.
basically
Yep.
create your own
Yep.
infrastructure.
So yeah, Sandy, that sounds great. But keep talking. Yes.
After this butcher of our government and you lose all of your top management,
Mm-hmm.
how have you found the people to replace those people?
Well, right now they're not there, so that's frustrating. We have a couple, because we have a declaration in Pennsylvania with the Hurricane Debbie that I mentioned. We actually still do have access to a couple of the people that we had been working with who are wonderful. Like the partners we work with are fantastic, but now that there's a shutdown, we don't have access to anyone at FEMA. So I would say we have lost a lot of our critical partners in the federal program. There's a couple really key people that we don't have access to, who just have like the understanding of how the federal programs work and can help individual households navigate some of those. Like if they have an appeal, like through Hurricane Ida, here in Bucks County, if Linda was here, she could give you exact details, but like there were a couple families who had really complicated cases, so they had to make appeals to their FEMA, like that they felt like they didn't get. There was like one that their septic system was ruined, and they only got a couple $100 towards that, where they made an appeal, and then they were able to get thousands more to repair their septic. The person who helped us navigate that in the federal program was phenomenal, and she was laid off in this. And just, she knew how to navigate the whole system. So to answer your question, I guess, we have some solid people that are still there, but we've lost many of them as well. And they haven't been replaced. Yes?
A question, does Thrivent ever become involved?
Yeah, Thrivent, especially with the action teams. Like we use, my dad, me, like people I know, I'm like, hey, would you like to put a Thrivent action team together to help fund the flood buckets, or like even to take volunteers out for a dinner or an educational program. So we haven't been able to get like large grants from them, but it's been a really good way for individual congregations and individuals to really kind of make, like Thrivent says, like make an impact in their community. So I'm very interested in working with people who are Thrivent members. If you know anyone, yeah.
You mentioned clearances. What kind of clearances are?
We because of Pennsylvania state law, if we are working with anybody, like the child abuse clearances is the one, and then the criminal record check. So we don't get clearances on everyone, but because we just haven't had the capacity to manage that. So what we do is when we are working on someone's home, we have a homeowner agreement, and we say on that homeowner agreement that no children, we can be present while we're working on this home. And it's good practice anyway. We don't want kids in a construction area, but that's our way of addressing that. But I would like to get to where we have people, like I don't even have to, like we have people in the system who have their clearances, and I don't have to worry about it. Because sometimes we'll have churches, especially if we had a church who was hosting a volunteer team. This was in a Baptist church in the Berks County area. The team was coming from Maryland, and Pennsylvania law, it's pretty easy to get your clearances online, but the church had a daycare, and they wanted any volunteer coming to have their clearances, but Maryland doesn't have the same registry, so it ended up not, it didn't work. Like they wouldn't accept the team, and the team couldn't figure out where, we couldn't get them to stay somewhere else in the short turnaround period. So that was a issue. But that's the short answer is the child abuse clearances and the criminal record check.
Could you speak to more about what's in the buckets?
Sure. I just made 50 of them 2 weeks ago, so it's, a couple pairs of different kinds of gloves, different sponges, laundry detergent, scrub brushes, clothesline, clothespins. We don't do bleach anymore. Those kinds of things. I
And is
can't
it
have
any
them.
type of bucket? It's just in a
It's a
bucket?
5 gallon. It's a 5 gallon
gallon.
bucket, and I have the lists available.
Hmm.
But yeah, you can, and sometimes people get them from like delis that have the vats, or you can buy them at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever.
Harbor Freight's giving away this weekend.
Oh yeah?
Everybody go get your bucket.
Oh my, yeah, that's good to know. But I'm happy to talk about any issues related to this or any questions you might have.
So your funding mostly comes from national
well,
LDR, or do you have to apply for a grant to get any funding from them?
I would say when we do our recovery, like for an event, a disaster event, almost, since I've been doing this, we go to the national church to look for additional funding. But that doesn't keep us kind of going as far as operationally in the meantime, which I think is extremely important, and I mean, it helps fund my position and the relationship building, and that support comes from like the Oktoberfest that St. Paul's does for us, and donations from churches and individuals. So we get no federal funding, which I've always been super proud of, and I don't think I knew why I was so proud of that until recently, like why that was such an amazing thing. But it's really been kind of a relief. But anyway, both the grants from the ELCA, and I do try to get other grants from other sources sometimes too, like through the national VOAD, like I mentioned the Pennsylvania VOAD, there's a national version of that. Sometimes we'll get grants from like the UPS Foundation. There's a place called the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. So a couple organizations will apply together through the national VOAD for those kinds of grants, and then the UCC might get some of that money, or we'll get some of it for a specific case. So there's a couple places we get it besides the national church as well.
Julia, how do you coordinate with other disaster relief groups in either denominational groups or civic groups?
Mm-hmm. That's what I
so
spend
people
my-
don't double and triple dip, but more importantly, that you spread the wealth, if you will.
That's the whole point of this VOAD. It's Voluntary Organizations Active in
Okay.
Disaster. I'm currently the president of it for Pennsylvania, and that is the mechanism where we coordinate. So we do that through, like, the coordination is things like a lot of Zoom calls and conference calls, and the whole purpose is to not duplicate resources and to make sure the resources are distributed equitably. So we share databases. We also do there's a tool called Crisis Cleanup, so that's a great tool to collaborate as well, and that's put out by a Mormon organization. And so that allows, like, when something's happening, we call this guy at that organization and say, can you turn on Crisis Cleanup for this event? We get a phone number, we try to coordinate with emergency management and say, please get this phone number out there. People can call in, or they can go online and report what issues they're having. And then any team that's it's very low bar, but we all know each other, so like as long as you're kind of a known entity, you get the approval to see what's out in that like database to say like, okay, there's on this street, it's lighting up, so it's all mapped. So you can see there's lots of red in this area of Hatboro. And they're all saying that they've got tree damage. So a group like Samaritan's Purse, who you might have heard of, they're big on doing debris removal, or Team Rubicon's a veterans group. They'll go in and claim the cases, and then they should go in afterwards and say, okay, we've completed the work. So then we start seeing the map turn green for completed work. So that's another tool and there's a couple tools like that.
So it's really coordinated nicely.
We try to do we always say we could do better, but that's the best tool we have early on to coordinate. And just lots of talking to each other constantly.
Any other questions? Julie, we'd like to really thank you for being here. It's a lot of information.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I have some information over there if you're interested, and happy to stick around and talk for whoever would like.